In the heart of medieval Florence, among the walls of a noble family, a man was born who never imagined being remembered as a saint. His life, marked by rebellion and redemption, left an indelible mark on those who knew him and on generations to come. This is the story of Saint Andrew Corsini, the shepherd who, before being a lamb, had to face the wolf within him. 1. The awaited grace, a miracle in the Corsini family. In the 14th century, in the city of Florence, the Corsini family lived with a profound desire that seemed unattainable: to have a child. Nicholas and Peregrina, nobles of great renown, faced the weight of silence in their home. Their prayers were fervent, their hopes persistent, but the years passed without an answer. Amidst this anguishing weight, love and faith kept them united. They never ceased to trust in divine providence. It was then, on a day that seemed like any other, that their supplications were finally answered. Peregrina, in an act of faith and joy, announced that she was pregnant. The birth of Andres on November 30th, 1302, was celebrated as a true miracle, a sign that God had heard their prayers. From the beginning, Andres's parents felt that he was destined for something special. He was not just a son, he was a divine grace that illuminated their home. Nicholas and Peregrina promised to educate him in the values of faith and virtue, knowing that Andres was a unique blessing. The Corsini house was a place where wealth mingled with simplicity. Although they lived surrounded by privileges, the family always placed faith at the center of their lives. They wanted to ensure that Andres grew up with the same sense of humility and devotion that they practiced. However, they could not foresee the challenges that would arise over time. The child they had so longed for would bring joys, but also trials that would test their faith and strength as parents. 2. A rebellious child. The years of childhood and his mother's painful prophecy. Andres Corsini was not an easy child. Despite his parents' loving care, he grew up showing an impulsive, rebellious, and often defiant character. While other children learned the virtues of obedience and humility, Andres preferred the pleasures and distractions of life, something that deeply worried Nicholas and Peregrina. At 15 years old, his behavior had reached a critical point. Peregrina, in the midst of her anguish, decided to share a dream she had had before his birth. "Son, in my dream you were a wolf, wild and fierce." These words left Andres chilled. He had never thought about how his actions could hurt his parents, especially his mother, but what she said next was even more impactful. That wolf entered a church and came out transformed into a lamb. Although these words were a reprimand, they also hid a seed of hope. Deep in his heart, Andres began to reflect. That night, for the first time in years, he could not sleep well. His thoughts were filled with his mother's words and a deep desire to change, though he did not yet know how. The connection between Peregrina's dream and his life seemed like a divine message. Perhaps it was time to stop running from what was calling him and face his own inner wolf. Without telling anyone, Andres made a decision that would change his life forever. He woke up early the next day and walked to the Carmelite church, not knowing that this simple act would be the beginning of his transformation. 3. The transformative encounter when a wolf became a lamb. The Carmelite church in Florence was a peaceful place, almost outside of time. There, Andres, still young and tormented, knelt before an image of the Virgin Mary. For the first time in a long while, he had no words for his thoughts, only tears. It was as if all the weight of his mistakes was being brought to light, and he couldn't escape it. Before that image, he prayed with all his heart, asking for a second chance, a new path. As he shed tears, something changed within him. A peace he had never felt before enveloped him, as if the Virgin herself was listening. It was at that moment that Andres felt an overwhelming clarity. He could not continue on the same path as before. After his experience in the church, Andres sought out the Carmelite provincial to express his desire to join the order. Although the provincial was surprised, he also saw in the young man's eyes a determination that could only come from an authentic divine experience. From that day on, Andrés began his path of conversion. He bid farewell to the superficial pleasures that had once seduced him and embraced a life of faith and discipline. Those who knew him could barely recognize him. It was as if the wolf had disappeared, and in his place stood a humble and determined lamb. Andrés' transformation was not just a change in behavior, but a true inner revolution. His heart, once full of pride, was now filled with service and love for God. 4. The brave decision, the first step towards religious life. In 1318, Andrés took the step that would mark the course of his life. He was accepted to wear the Carmelite habit. This moment represented much more than a change of attire. It symbolized a renunciation of his past and an unwavering commitment to God. Although he was still young, the decision to embrace a religious life was not easy. Opposition soon arose, especially from his uncle, who dreamed of seeing him succeed in the secular world. The novitiate was a time of trial for Andrés. While some questioned whether he was truly fit for religious life due to his rebellious past, he persevered with humility. Instead of seeking recognition, he dedicated himself to the simplest tasks, helping in the kitchen, serving the sick, and begging for the community's needs. Every small action brought him closer to God and to the Carmelite ideals of poverty, obedience, and humility. Despite the temptations and doubts that arose, Andrés remained steadfast in his faith. In January 1321, he pronounced his solemn vows, officially consecrating his life to the service of Christ. It was a moment of profound significance, not only for him, but also for those who had witnessed his transformation. Over time, his spiritual fervor became evident. He was no longer the impulsive young man he once was. He was now a dedicated man, willing to face any challenge for the love of God. Andrés understood that true greatness was not in titles or riches, but in the ability to serve others with a pure heart. Thus, the young man who had once caused pain to his family was now becoming an example of faith and sacrifice. But his journey was only beginning, and the greatest trials were yet to come. 5. The path of humility. Days as a Carmelite novice. Life in the Carmelite monastery was not easy. Andrés had to adapt to a completely different environment, where comforts were scarce and spiritual and physical demands were constant. However, these difficulties helped him deepen his faith and strengthen his character. Among the assigned tasks, Andrés stood out for his willingness to perform the humblest work. He cleaned the floors, cooked for the brothers, and cared for the sick without complaint. This attitude surprised many, especially those who knew of his noble origin. He did not seek privileges or recognition, but found joy in silent service. But humility was not only reflected in his actions, but also in his attitude towards others. Andrés treated everyone with kindness and respect regardless of their position. His behavior began to inspire his companions, who saw in him a living example of Carmelite values. However, Andrés was not exempt from trials. His family, especially his uncle, continued trying to convince him to abandon religious life and return to the secular world. They offered wealth, titles, and all kinds of privileges. But Andrés, strengthened by prayer and community support, remained firm in his decision. Those years as a novice not only prepared him for the challenges of religious life, but also helped him discover the profound meaning of humility and absolute dependence on God. Andrés understood that true greatness lay in selfless service and personal sacrifice. 6. Between the world and God, the temptations Andrés overcame. Despite his commitment to religious life, Andrés was not free from temptations. The outside world continued to call him, reminding him of a life he had left behind. The wealth, pleasures, and honors he had once sought returned to his mind like shadows trying to divert him from his path. One of the strongest temptations came when his uncle, an influential man, offered him a prestigious position in Florentine politics. "You could change the lives of many from power," he said, trying to appeal to his sense of responsibility. But Andres knew that this offer did not come from God, but from a human desire to divert him from his vocation. Instead of succumbing to these distractions, Andres strengthened his faith through prayer and sacrifice. He spent long hours in the silence of the chapel, seeking divine guidance. In his moments of greatest weakness, he found comfort in the image of the Virgin Mary, to whom he had promised his fidelity from the beginning of his conversion. He also faced criticism and mockery from those who did not believe in his transformation. Some doubted the sincerity of his faith, accusing him of seeking attention. But Andres did not allow these words to affect him. His humility and dedication were his response to those who questioned his path. Overcoming these temptations not only strengthened his character, but also prepared him for the even greater challenges he would face later. Andres understood that religious life was not an escape route, but a constant battle against the forces of the world and oneself. 7. The faithful servant, his life as a priest in service to the needy. Andres's priestly ordination in 1328 marked a turning point in his life. Now his mission was not only to pray and contemplate, but also to bring the light of Christ through action. From the beginning, Andres showed an unwavering commitment to the poorest and the destitute, becoming a true example of Christian love in action. Andres dedicated his time to visiting the sick, listening to the afflicted, and consoling those who had lost hope. But he did not limit himself to words. He personally attended to the needy, shared his food with them, and on occasions even gave his own cloak to the poorest. His dedication was so profound that many considered him a living reflection of the gospel. One of the most remarkable features of his ministry was his ability to treat each person with dignity, regardless of their condition. Andres did not see the poor as a burden, but as precious souls he must serve. His love for them was a natural extension of his love for God, and this attitude transformed the lives of many he encountered on his path. Despite his humility, Andres became a recognized figure in Florence. People began to seek him out, not only for his material help, but also for his advice and spiritual guidance. His life was a constant testimony of divine compassion, and his example inspired others to follow in his footsteps. However, Andres did not boast about the praise, nor allow his popularity to divert him from his vocation. He continued to live with simplicity and dedication, always remembering that his purpose was to serve Christ through others. His priesthood was a tangible manifestation of his commitment to faith, and his legacy began to extend beyond the monastery walls. 8. The call to the episcopate, a responsibility he tried to avoid. Andres's life took an unexpected turn when he was chosen to be the Bishop of Fiesole. This decision, made by the clergy and the people, surprised Andres, who considered himself unworthy of such an honor. In his humility, he felt he was not prepared to assume such a great responsibility and decided to flee. He hid in the Carthusian monastery in Florence, hoping that the lack of news about his whereabouts would lead the authorities to choose another person. During this time, Andres devoted himself to prayer and service within the Carthusian community, convinced that his place was in anonymity, not in prominence. However, God's plans were different. A mysterious intervention occurred when a child appeared in the middle of the village, indicating the exact place where Andres had hidden. This event was interpreted as a divine sign, and the message was clear. Andres was the chosen one. For Andres, this revelation was a moment of confrontation with his own fear. A second apparition in which a child assured him that the Virgin Mary would accompany him in his mission gave him the strength needed to accept the call. With a heart full of trust in God, Andres returned to Fiesole and assumed his role as bishop. As a pastor, Andres brought his simplicity and love for the poor to the episcopate. He governed with justice and compassion, being an example for all who were under his care. His leadership was not based on power, but on service, and his presence made a profound difference in the diocese. 9. Miracles in Fiesole, the bishop who touched souls and healed wounds. Andres's episcopate was a time of miracles and testimony of faith. His dedication to the poor and his closeness to the sick made many people begin to consider that his actions were touched by divine grace. One of the most remembered miracles occurred when a man with legs covered in ulcers refused to let Andres wash his feet. Andres, with his usual humility, insisted on performing the service. After washing and drying the man's wounds, they began to heal miraculously. The man, deeply moved, became a fervent devotee and shared his testimony with everyone he knew. This miracle not only strengthened the faith of the people, but also underscored Andres's sanctity. But Andres's miracles were not limited to physical healing. His presence had the power to bring peace to anguished hearts. On many occasions, his words managed to reconcile divided families and resolve conflicts that seemed impossible to settle. His ability to unite people was considered a divine gift. Despite these extraordinary events, Andres never sought credit for the miracles. He attributed everything to God's mercy and continued to live with the same humility and simplicity that had always characterized him. For him, miracles were an opportunity to bring people closer to faith and show them Christ's love. In Fiesole, Andres became not only a spiritual leader but also a symbol of hope for those facing difficulties. His life demonstrated that, with faith and humility, any obstacle could be overcome. 10. A list of mercy. Helping the poor in secret. Andres' compassion for the poor knew no bounds. One of his most moving initiatives was the creation of a secret list of the so-called ashamed poor. These were people who, despite living in extreme need, did not ask for help out of fear of judgment from others or out of pride. Andres took it upon himself to identify these individuals and find discreet ways to help them. He sent them food, clothing, and other necessary resources without them knowing where it came from. This respectful and loving attitude not only alleviated their suffering, but also restored their dignity. During his weekly visits to the poor, Andres adopted the practice of washing their feet, following Christ's example. This act of humility was an expression of his deep love for them and a reminder that everyone, regardless of their situation, was equal in God's eyes. One Thursday, while performing this act, a man tried to reject his help, saying he was not worthy due to his wounds and illnesses. Andres insisted, washed his feet, and consoled him. By the end, the man experienced a miraculous healing. This event quickly spread throughout the village, further strengthening the faith of those around him. Andres' list was not just a form of charity, it was a manifestation of his commitment to justice and love for his neighbor. His example left an indelible mark on the diocese and in the hearts of those who knew him. 11. The Man of Peace. The Divine Mission. In Bologna, in a moment of crisis, Pope Urban V called upon Andres to undertake a crucial mission: to restore peace in Bologna, a city divided by internal conflicts and rivalries between factions. Tensions had reached a critical point, and it seemed that nothing could reconcile the opposing sides. Andres accepted the task with humility, trusting that God would guide him in this challenge. When Andres arrived in Bologna, he found a city in chaos. Families were divided, and violence was part of daily life. Instead of imposing solutions from above, Andres began by listening. He visited the involved parties, understood their concerns, and showed a genuine willingness to mediate. His calm presence and reputation as a holy man made him a bridge between the opposing groups. Little by little, Andres began to build trust between the factions. He convened meetings where dialogue and reconciliation were encouraged. Although the process was slow, his perseverance and faith in people's ability to change bore fruit. Leaders began to commit, and peace, though fragile at first, started to settle in the city. In addition to his role as a mediator, Andres also dedicated himself to strengthening the people's faith. He celebrated masses, offered confessions, and preached about the importance of unity and forgiveness. His words, backed by his actions, inspired people to leave hatred behind and seek a path of coexistence. When Andres left Bologna, the city had changed. Although conflicts did not disappear entirely, his intervention marked the beginning of a new era of hope. Andres's mission was a reminder that, with faith and humility, even the most impossible challenges could be overcome. 12. An appearance of hope, the Virgin Mary, and the final announcement. In the last years of his life, Andres continued to devote himself fully to his vocation. However, on Christmas Day, something extraordinary happened. While praying in his chapel, he had a vision of the Virgin Mary. In this apparition, the Mother of God announced to him that his time on earth was coming to an end. Although the message was clear, it was not received with sadness, but with profound peace. Andres understood that his life had been an instrument in God's hands, and that the time to reunite with him was near. In the following days, he redoubled his efforts to serve the poor and comfort the afflicted. He did not speak of the vision to many, but those who knew him noticed a change in his demeanor, a light of serenity and joy that could only come from someone at peace with his mission. The Virgin's announcement was also a reminder to Andres of the importance of preparing his soul. He spent long hours in prayer and contemplation, surrendering everything he was and everything he had done into God's hands. He had no fear because he knew his life had been in service to the gospel. The people, unaware of what was to come, continued to approach Andres for advice and comfort. Until his last days, his life was a source of hope for all who surrounded him. The news of his impending departure would be revealed to the people only after his death, confirming the special nature of his mission on earth. The Virgin Mary's apparition was the last manifestation of a life deeply connected with the divine. Andres knew he was not alone, and that the Mother of God would accompany him in his passage to eternity. 13. The final journey, Epiphany Day and eternal glory. On January 6, 1373, the day of the Epiphany of the Lord, Andres left this world. His death was not a tragic event, but a celebration of a life entirely dedicated to God. Surrounded by his Carmelite brothers, Andres departed in peace, leaving behind an indelible legacy of faith, humility, and service. News of his passing quickly spread throughout Florence and beyond. People from all over came to the Carmelite church to pay homage to a man who had touched so many lives. His body was placed in a splendid chapel where the faithful could come to pray and seek comfort. Soon, miracles began to be attributed to his intercession. Sick people claimed to have been healed after praying beside his tomb, and others found peace and resolution in desperate situations. These events led to the beginning of his canonization process, which ultimately culminated in 1629 under the pontificate of Urban VIII. Andres' life was a reminder that holiness is not a destiny reserved only for a few, but a possibility for all who choose to fully surrender to God's love. His spiritual journey, marked by conversion, service, and miracles, continues to inspire believers around the world. The Epiphany of the Lord, the day of his death, became a symbol of his mission, to bring the light of Christ to all corners, even in the darkest moments. 14. The legacy of Saint Andrew Corsini, a light that endures through time. Saint Andrew Corsini left an indelible legacy in the history of the Church and in the hearts of the faithful. His life, from his rebellious youth to his sainthood, became a testimony to the transformative power of divine grace. Beyond the miracles and works he performed, his example of humility, service, and love for his neighbor remains a source of inspiration for those seeking an authentic and living faith. Andres taught that no matter how lost a heart may be, there is always a way back to God. As a priest and bishop, his leadership made a tangible difference in the lives of those under his care. He did not govern with power, but with compassion, seeing in each person the face of Christ. His ability to reconcile opposing factions in Bologna and his constant service to the poor reflected his commitment to peace and justice. Andres was not only a spiritual guide, but also a bridge between human conflicts and divine hope. The people of Fiesole and Florence still remember with reverence his acts of charity, especially his dedication to helping the poor in secret. His list of the ashamed poor and his practice of washing the feet of the needy are eternal examples of a love that does not seek recognition, but the dignity of others. His life invites us to look beyond ourselves, to extend our hands to those in greatest need, and to practice sincere charity. The miracles attributed to Saint Andres, both during his life and after his death, have strengthened the faith of generations. From healing diseases to providing comfort in moments of despair, his intercession continues to be a source of hope for those who invoke him. His canonization in 1629 was a recognition not only of his heroic virtues, but also of his lasting impact on the Christian community. Today, the name of Saint Andrew Corsini resonates in the prayers of the faithful and in the teachings of the Church as a model of conversion and total surrender to God. His legacy is not limited to altars, but lives in every act of love, in every effort to reconcile, and in every soul that seeks peace in Christ. In his life and sanctity, we find a beacon that illuminates the path to eternity. Prayer to Saint Andrew Corsini, model of conversion, humility, and divine love. O glorious Saint Andrew Corsini, beloved son of Florence and eternal example of faith, you who were a wolf in your youth and by divine grace became a lamb of the Lord, hear our supplications today and carry our petitions to the Heavenly Father. You who learned to find Christ in serving the poor, in comforting the sick, and in embracing the humble, teach us to live with a generous heart, capable of loving without measure, capable of forgiving without reservations. O Saint of Peace, you who brought reconciliation where there was conflict, inspire us to be builders of unity in our families, in our communities, and in the world. Grant us the courage to act with justice, but also the meekness to understand others. Saint Andres, you who humbly accepted the call to the episcopate and governed with wisdom and compassion, teach us to assume our responsibilities with the same spirit, always guided by the light of the Virgin Mary, who accompanied you in every moment of your mission. Intercede for us in our needs, heal the sick, strengthen the weak, console the afflicted, and protect those who suffer. Just as you washed the feet of the poor and healed those in greatest need with your love, be for us a bridge to God's infinite mercy. O Shepherd of souls, who gave your life for the good of others and received the crown of glory on Epiphany Day, help us to find the purpose God has placed in our lives and guide us on the path of holiness until the day we can reunite with you in the heavenly kingdom. Saint Andrew Corsini, pray for us, so that inspired by your example of conversion, faith, and humility, we too may be witnesses to Christ's eternal love in the world. Amen.